Hi there. Ooh, what a bad start. Hi there. Welcome to my video on noise reduction plugins. Now, I have come to this video with a slightly weird philosophy. I am trying to find the best noise reduction plugins that can be set by someone with little to no audio knowledge. Something you can use in your FX chain when you're, say, recording an audiobook and not have to think about. So the way I've dealt with this is through a fairly unusual series of tests. So I have recorded the first paragraph of Winnie the Pooh, which is my favourite long-form set of audio to use for these tests, while my glamorous and off-screen assistant runs around turning vacuum cleaners and washing machines on and off. I have then normalized the audio to -3 dB and edited the audio just to remove any gaps, especially the bit where I had to wait for a few minutes for an aeroplane to fly overhead. Beyond that, there's no editing, no second takes. I also left in 2 sets of inexplicable and I think software-related distortion to see how the plugins would deal with them. As I said, I'm effectively using these plugins as a combination set and forget and basic mode setup. So what that means practically is I set up all these tests without once listening to the audio. I used whatever settings the plugin learnt, whatever it used as the default for dialogue, or what appeared to be the best settings in general for reducing noise, no matter the circumstance. So I want to note, I will be returning to these plugins in another video to explore how they sound when they're used properly, because this kind of test is not going to put them all, it is not going to be fair to all these plugins. Some of them are going to underperform because of the way they've been set up. Others, on the other hand, are going to prove, I hope, to be really, really good as a set and forget basic plugin. So the plugins I'm testing in current price order are Sonox Oxford Denoiser, which is a high-performance audio restoration plugin from Sonox, which has separate dehisser, detect and remove sections and a high-resolution FFT display for visualizing and adjusting the noise profile. It has tools like frequency bias curve, warmth control, and makeup gain. If you've seen my videos, you know I've got a thing about makeup gain working properly. And it is designed to preserve tonal integrity and maintain a natural character. It has also been discontinued shortly before doing this video, and I actually decided to include it because it is still available at a ridiculously cut down price. Now, I'm not going to share the price of it now because actually when it comes to going through the examples, I'm going to display things on screen. Every time you see an example, you are going to see at the top of the video the name of the noise that is being dealt with, at the bottom the name of the plugin, on the left the price in British pounds and US dollars, and on the right the ratio by which rendering is slowed down by the plugin. So it turned out that rendering this audio raw was almost exactly done at 100 speed. So if a plugin has reduced that to 5 times speed, then that is then a 20:1 ratio. If a plugin reduces it to 40 speed, that would be a 2.5:1 ratio. So that will be what is on screen each time. So you can see the actual cost of Sonox Oxford Denoiser when we come to that. The second plugin you'll see is Clevgran's Brusfri. This is said to be a highly advanced yet elegantly simple noise reducer. It excels at cleaning noisy audio with minimal artifacts and no phase issues, thanks to intuitive interface and finely tuned gating, including features like attack, release, sidechain, high-pass filter, smooth and mix controls for fast and effective operation, which suggests to me it might be a bit too broadband and a bit too simple to deal with these kinds of tests. Third up is Wave's NS1. It is said to be the most intuitive professional noise suppression plugin available, and frankly, it is very easy to use, built on the one knob series philosophy. NS1 automatically analyzes and separates foreground dialogue from background noise, allowing for real-time noise reduction with just a single control, perfect for fast cleanup in post-production, voiceovers, or in live dialogue. After that, I have got Waves Clarity VX Pro. I do not have a working copy of Clarity VX. I should have a working copy of Clarity VX, but for whatever reason, I could not get it to work at the moment. It kept crashing on me, so instead I used a demo of Waves Clarity VX Pro for the tests. It is an AI-powered real-time voice noise reduction plugin designed to deliver artifact-free results with minimal effort. It's driven by Waves neural networks and cleans vocals instantly using intuitive controls to eliminate hours of post-production cleanup while preserving quality for podcasts, film, and other voice applications. Oh, I've still got a lot more marketing jargon to get through. Bear with me. Next up is Acon Extract Dialogue, a fully automatic noise reduction plugin powered by deep learning, trained on thousands of voice and noise samples. It intelligently separates dialogue from background noise like wind, hum, or rustle, requiring no manual intervention, with real-time processing and simple sensitivity controls. It sounds like the kind of thing I'm after very much. After that, we have got Hush. So Hush is an AI-powered standalone app, and if you have Pro Tools, Hush Pro is a Pro Tools only plugin variant for macOS. It is designed to clean dialogue recordings by removing ambient noise and room reflections with minimal artifacts. It is built using the Apple Neural Engine, so only works on M-series processors on Apple Macs, and it delivers clean spoken word audio without needing a specialized recording environment. I used Hush once to treat audio that I recorded in a very reverby bathroom while on holiday, while a industrially sized lawnmower was going outside the open window. I ran Hush through the audition I did, and I got that audition. So Hush has a fairly special place in my heart. After Hush, we have got Accentize dxRevive, another AI-based speech restoration plugin. Note, speech restoration plugin, not just noise reduction plugin. And it's aimed at enhancing dialogue recordings by reinstating missing frequencies and improving clarity. So rather than just suppressing noise, dxRevive intelligently reconstructs degraded or thin audio to sound studio quality using advanced signal recovery techniques. What that suggests to me is that it may underperform as a noise reduction plugin, despite people generally recommending it as such. I'm inclined to think that where it's really going to perform its best, and I'm not looking at it in this test, I will look at it in another video, it sounds to me like dxRevive is going to perform best if used with a separate and slightly enthusiastic or over-enthusiastic noise reduction plugin. Use the first plugin to cut the noise, use dxRevive to recover or reinstate some of the missing frequencies. After that, we have got Supertone Clear, known when it was in beta as a Goyo Clear, I believe, or just Goyo. I didn't test it at the time, but I know a lot of people will still recommend it using the old name. It is a lightweight, real-time denoise, de-reverb, and voice separation plugin powered by cutting-edge neural networks. It splits audio into voice, ambience, and reverb channels, giving creators intuitive three-knob control over each, ideal for fast, artifact-minimal cleanup on the go. After that, we have got Accentize dxRevive Pro. So yes, I am, in this case, comparing the non-pro and pro versions. This is Accentize's flagship AI-powered voice restoration plugin with multiband processing and advanced neural algorithms. In practice, what that means is I've used it in exactly the same way as regular dxRevive, but with one of the algorithms that is not available in standard dxRevive, one of the pro and the algorithms. As with dxRevive, it not only suppresses noise, but it restores lost frequencies, removes codec artifacts and reverb, revives clipped or bandwidth-limited speech recordings, and does so with high fidelity clarity. Again, this says to me it's not going to succeed very well on its own. It's best used with a second noise reduction plugin working after the noise reduction plugin has been in operation. Next, second last, you'll be glad to hear, is RX Voice Denoise, which is available in RX Elements, I believe, and I am pretty sure I have misquoted the price throughout the entire video, as I think at the time of prepping the video, I thought it was only in RX Standard. But this is, as I said, part of the iZotope RX suite. It offers adaptive broadband noise reduction tailored specifically for vocals and dialogue. It has manual and automatic modes. I highly recommend the automatic mode. I use it in my own audiobook plugin chain. And RX Voice Denoise is designed to intelligently reduce continuous noise while preserving the natural quality and dynamics of spoken or sung audio. What that means is it going to struggle when I'm changing the background noise from, say, a vacuum cleaner to a washing machine? And finally, and probably intended to be the best out of the lot, it's certainly the most expensive out of the lot, is RX Dialogue Isolate. It is a top-tier spectral editing module from iZotope, which has some functionality in RX Standard and all functionality in RX Advanced. The price you'll see throughout the video is from RX Advanced. It leverages machine learning to isolate dialogue from complex audio mixes. It delivers studio-grade voice separation by intelligently separating speech components from background content for ultra-clean dialogue tracks. It does so by doing it slowly. So, just to reconfirm, at the top of each section of this video, you'll see the name of the plugin. Sorry, you'll see the name of the noise in the background. At the bottom, you'll see the name of the plugin. On the left, you'll see the price in GBP and USD. And on the right, you will see a ratio which reflects to what ratio is the rendering speed reduced by the use of the plugin. All of these samples will appear in price order, albeit that every third thing you see on the screen will be the raw audio again. This will make it a bit less of a pleasant viewing experience, but means what you can do is, in each plugin's case, either raw is directly before or directly after. So you'll be able to do an A/B/BA test on every single one of these plugins, which I think is the best way to actually hear what they're doing. So let's have a listen to how they perform. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump. On the back of his head, behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head, behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. On the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. And then he feels that perhaps there isn't. 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 Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Winnie the Pooh. 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 So, not just do I have conclusions, I have got rankings. I have ranked all 12 of these plugins, well, 11 plugins and raw audio, in ranking from 12th place to 1st. So, in 12th place, and coming up short, is not raw audio, to my surprise. It is Oxford Denoiser by Sonox. To my surprise, it actually did a good job with the plane going overhead. I say to my surprise because it did such a poor job with everything else. In the rest of the tests, nothing really happened. And despite not dropping the peak much, it went from -1 to -1.9 overall. Only 2 plugins ended up dropping the overall loudness, dropping the LUFS-I significantly. And this and the plugin in 11th place that I'll discuss next were the only two to do so, which is interesting considering that it appears that nothing really happened. As I said earlier, it has been discontinued just before doing this video, so I probably shouldn't have included it, but it's still available on the cheap if you look carefully. But frankly, I can see why it's been discontinued. It can't compete with the more intelligent plugins. And that's the same problem faced by our plugin in 11th place, which is Clevergrand Brusfri. What I liked was that it did a pretty good job with the floor fan, which is the most stable of all the noises, which I think is quite telling. However, it doesn't appear to have makeup gain, a pet hate, at least not correct makeup gain. It dropped the peak from -1 to -4.8, while every single other plugin stayed between -1 and -1.9. So, it really did kind of affect the audio. Unsurprisingly, it dropped the LUFS, which makes sense if the peak had dropped. I suspect it might have even increased the LUFS if I'd then normalized back up. A bit confusing. Despite performing badly, it still had a 2.5 to 1 render ratio, meaning it rendered at 40 speed rather than the 100 of the raw. And in every single case, it sounded metallic, muffled, or hollow. Except for the time it had to deal with the graunch. That is, believe it or not, the technical term for the distortion sound, the so instead of dealing with the graunch at all, it just cut it out, which, is just as bad as not including it at all, in my opinion. Just as bad as not processing it at all, in my opinion. In 10th place, and slightly shocking me, to be honest, is Exentai's dxRevive Pro. I want to caveat this by saying, firstly, my theory is that dxRevive Pro is going to perform its best if run after another noise reduction plugin. Secondly, all I did was choose the algorithm that was unique to dxRevive Pro, which may not have been the right algorithm. And thirdly, something else may have just gone wrong, because I'm really quite surprised that I've ended up ranking it below the non-pro version. But what I did like is this was the only plugin to increase LRA. So it was actually increasing the dynamic range, which is unsurprising if it's restoring frequency content that wasn't there. It also did an excellent job with the graunch, the distortion that happened during the floor fan and plane tests. By far, it was its biggest strength, and it was the best plugin for this, which actually suggests to me that, although I have chosen a pro-only algorithm, it might not have been the right one. There is also another pro-only algorithm. I think there might even be two other pro-only algorithms. So I would like to revisit this if I get the chance. What I don't like about the plugin is the price. I'm not a fan of iLok. It just annoys me having to, register my plugin once I've paid for it, in my opinion. I'm not so much a fan of the 20 to 1 rendering ratio, meaning it rendered at a 5 times speed compared to the 100 times speed of RAW. And it tended to sound a bit muffled on everything, which isn't what I expected. And it's the muffled sound, which is why I've ranked it so low. It struggled with the vacuum, adding a lot of artifacts. And it changed the tone on the washing machine tests, which isn't what I wanted. I don't want it to change the tone of what I'm listening to. I just wanted to take away the noise. In 9th place is no plugin. So yes, I am saying that the plugins I have mentioned so far are doing a worse job than nothing. That is strong words, and it is why I think that this test has not been fair to Exentai's dxRevive Pro. Because frankly, that plugin should be doing a lot more than nothing. Despite not touching the audio, it still sounded better to me raw than 3 other plugins. But of course, there is no actual noise removal, so there's nothing really to say about this. In 8th place, somehow beating out the Pro version, is the regular dxRevive. As I said, I'm surprised it did a better job than the Pro version. Given that some of the algorithms are exactly the same, it does seem to me that I should probably test the same algorithm in the Pro and non-Pro versions to make sure something's not going a bit funny. To my absolute shock, it doesn't slow down processing in the slightest. It's still processed at 100 times speed. Although that does make me a bit concerned that it hasn't worked properly. What I don't like is it does tend towards not doing anything rather than overdoing it. Most of my notes say barely does a thing, and combined with the fact that processing hasn't slowed down, I can't help but wonder, maybe it is actually not doing anything. In 7th place was Waves NS1. So what I like is the price point, which is fantastic. Although I do have to note that it doesn't take much more to significantly jump up the list to some of the upcoming entries. What I don't like is it's the only plugin to raise the peak above where it started, which is annoying as hell. It is something that happened with Waves plugins before. It only seems to happen with Waves plugins. It really annoys me. Waves annoys me in the first place. There are many reasons why people don't like Waves. I have mine. You know, you might have yours. You might love Waves. All that is good. I don't want to go in. I don't want to try and have a philosophical discussion on plugin manufacturers. But the one thing that Waves seems to do is this thing about peaks, and it drives me up the wall. It sounds badly overprocessed on the vacuum test. It sounds badly overprocessed on the plane test. And it sounds slightly muffled on the wind test. In 6th place, and again I do not have the non-pro version working to compare this to, is Waves Clarity VX Pro. What I liked is it did a reasonable job on the vacuum, turning it into a hum. And that would have then been easy to control with a second instance or the use of another noise reduction plugin. It is definitely preferable to reducing the vacuum noise to just a hum than doing a bad job and over processing or distorting or noise gating the audio. It did a good job with the graunch, the distortion in the plane test, while most plugins didn't do anything with that. What I don't like is the price, and I'm really disappointed that the regular version of the plugin just kept crashing on me. I really would have liked to have tested it. It's a bit meh on the dryer, and of course my last criticism is Waves. I don't like the subscription model as a matter of course. In 5th place, we're starting to get kind of a fairly strong jump in quality at this point, is Acon's Extract dialogue. What I like is that it's very affordable, very easy to use. It does a reasonable job with the distortion, the graunch, when most plugins don't do anything with that. What I don't like, however, was the 10:1 rendering ratio, so the fact it rendered at 10x speed instead of 100x, and it struggled a lot with the vacuum. In fact, it sounds to me like it's constantly turning a noise gate on and off, which just sounds terrible. It also sounds a bit warbly on the plane test, and I wonder if that's the same thing that's happening with the vacuum test, just to a lesser degree. I wonder if it's some sort of noise gate going on, off, on, off, on, off, to a much subtler degree. In 4th place is RX Voice Denoise. What I like is that it is very accessible and easy to use, and did a terrific job in most cases. But when it starts to struggle, it really starts to struggle. It was a bit meh on the dryer test, and on the vacuum test, it seems to have shrugged its shoulders and given up trying. That said, this is the benchmark for me. This is the plugin I use on a day-to-day basis. So this is the plugin that needs to be beaten. In 3rd place is RX Dialogue Isolate. So what I like is that it did an exceptional job in most cases, and it did a phenomenal job with the vacuum. What I don't like is the price and the fact that it runs in basically real time. It's, I think, a 66-to-1 ratio versus real time being 100-to-1. So that must mean I think it renders at 1.5 speed. It's practically real time. It's also over-enthusiastic in 2 cases. In the case of the graunch distortion, it cut it out rather than trying to deal with it, like, say, a dxRevive Pro did. And it weirdly failed at the normal, no background noise test, because it cuts out the end of the word bump, which is odd. It's obviously designed to be used on kind of individual sentences, on audio as, cleaned up that can't be re-recorded. It's in third place because of its sheer performance, but it is not something I would be replacing RX Voice Denoise with. The next plugin is one I would be replacing RX Voice Denoise with. In fact, it might be a plugin that I will be replacing RX Voice Denoise with and RX dxRevive, because the two combined slow down my rendering speed quite a lot. And this performs amazingly. It is Supertone Clear. And before you wonder, yes, that means Hush is in first. We'll come back to that. But Supertone Clear was perfect at all except for 2 tests. The price is excellent. It's very easy to use. It is a fantastic plugin. I don't like the 10:1 rendering ratio, that it reduces the processing speed from 100x to 10x, but, that's not that bad in the grand scheme of things. It sounds slightly unclear on the plain test, and it also struggles with the vacuum test. Admittedly, it at least does something, unlike voice denoise. It sounds to me like it's flicking between sounding like it's applying noise gates on and off, like Acon's Extract dialog does, and actually controlling the sound successfully. It creates a distracting and unpleasant effect, and it suggests it's only just failing to perform with it. Failing to perform, just as well as I'd want. I think there's just something about the vacuum noise, the fact that vacuums are not consistent. They're kind of up and down and strengthen, they weaken as they're used. There's something about that the plugin really struggled with. In first place is Hush, but it's also disqualified. Let me tell you why. So what I like is it did almost as good a job as RX Dialog Isolate with the vacuum and was perfect with all the other tests but one. It is extraordinarily easy to use. It is quick. It is amazing. It is a fantastic plugin. Like Clear, it sounds slightly unclear on the plain test. And of course, it is macOS only, which will be a deal breaker for many. But the real reason it's a deal breaker is, firstly, I was testing Hush, not Hush Pro. I do not use Pro Tools. And it is not a plugin. It is a third-party piece of software at the moment. So, for the purposes of this test, it has to be disqualified. So you might be wondering why I still included it. Well, I emailed Ian Sampson recently. He's the guy, the one-man band behind Hush. And he said that although, compared to when I last spoke to him, when he actually said it would be out by now, he's given me a more realistic time frame for getting a VST version of Hush or Hush Pro. I'm not actually sure which of the two he's going to be releasing a VST in. But the VST version is likely to come out in Q1, maybe Q2 2026. Frankly, when it comes out, I will be getting Hush. Hush is absolutely mind-blowing. The difference, Supertone Clear is astonishingly good. The fact that Hush does better is mind-blowing. That's that for talking through these noise reduction plugins. But as I've said, the way I've visited these plugins is not necessarily fair. So I'm going to come back to some of these and some other recent plugins, particularly using non-noise reduction plugins for noise reduction and noise reduction plugins for general audio improvement. So seeing how they can combine, perhaps, in maybe certain different ways. So in that video, I will hopefully be re-looking at the following plugins. I will be coming back to look at my day-to-day workhorse of the Sonable Smart EQ4. I will be looking at Sound Theory Gullfoss again. I will be looking at McDSP SA3. I will be looking at Accentize dxRevive Pro and Accentize dxRevive Regular. I will be looking at Acon Extract Dialog, and I will be looking at RX Dialog Isolate. And the reason why I'm going to look at all of those is I'm going to configure them separately. I'm going to optimize each plugin for each type of noise being reduced, as in this time I'm actually going to listen to the audio, rather than this kind of idiotic set and forget method, which was designed in order to test just how simple they could be to set up. I will be doing it on exactly the same audio as I've used for this video. I will not be revisiting and re-recording anything new. I will be processing the exact same audio. So you'll be able to see how it compares with the tests when it's just been set in a fairly haphazard way. So I would look forward to you rejoining me for that video. It may not be the next video I include. In fact, I possibly might even be looking at the October Mark 12 again, now with the cardioid capsule that I previously didn't have when I did the hypercardioid test. But I will be coming back to noise reduction plugins soon. And when I do, I hope that you will come and watch that. Goodbye.